Alright, let's dive straight into Metasploit. To start Metasploit, you will have to run a command which is msf console. Keep in mind that Metasploit will do a lot of privileged actions. So for example, it will need to open some ports, connect to some ports, and so on. So if you're not running as root, always remember to run Metasploit with the sudo preceding the msf console command. And this is what I'm doing here. So I'm typing sudo msf console, I'm submitting my password, I'll give it a few seconds and Metasploit will load up. When it finishes loading, you will see a banner. This banner will change quite often, so don't be surprised if on your screen you're seeing something that looks slightly different. And this here describes on a very high level the different modules that we have in Metasploit. So these are all readily available for me to use against my target systems. Let's explore together the core commands. Keep in mind that these core commands are Metasploit commands, meaning if you run these commands on your Linux shell, these will not work. Linux will not recognize a lot of these commands. These commands are specific to Metasploit. And I can tell that I'm in my Metasploit console right now because of the way the prompt looks. Notice that this looks different than the normal Linux prompt that we're used to. And that indicates that now I'm able to run commands within Metasploit. The first command that I want to show you is the question mark. And the question mark indicates help. So this gives you a long list of all of the commands that you can run within Metasploit. The core commands, that is, again, because when we're using a module, we're going to see that we can use different commands. So always keep paying attention to what the prompt looks like. This tells you where you're at with Metasploit. Either you are in the main menu, or you are inside an exploit configuring an exploit, or you are inside an auxiliary module configuring that. You'll see what that looks like in a second, but just make sure that you keep your eye on the prompt, and that will tell you where you're at any given moment in time. So all of these are commands that you can run with Metasploit, and you see this long list of commands here. This is the core commands. So you can actually try any of these commands on the main menu of Metasploit. We're not going to cover all of these commands. We will cover the main ones that you absolutely need to know to operate and work efficiently with Metasploit. And below the core commands, there are the module commands. And these are the commands that we will use once we're inside a module. I know you might be a little bit confused now and you'll be thinking, well, how do we get inside a module and how do we use these commands? Don't worry, this is exactly what this section is about. For now, suffice it to know that if you want to make sure whether a command exists in Metasploit or not, apart from obviously researching it online, you could do a quick search using the question mark, and that will tell you all the list of commands that you can or cannot use. So let's get started with our first command. And with that command, we're going to be using our first auxiliary module. Let's say I want to do a port scan using Metasploit. Can I do that? Well, the easiest way to answer the question is to type search and port scan. And as you can see here, this lists results with all the modules that contain the word port scan, either in the name of the module, and this is what you see highlighted in purple, or inside the description of the module. So if you notice the first entry numbered 0, it does not have port scan in the name. So why did this come up? This came up because it has the word port scan in the description inside the module. We'll see how to get there in a moment. Well, okay, so how do I know what kind of information is presented inside that module? Well, it's as easy as typing info and the full name of the module. So let's say I want to check what does the module with number 4 next to it do, the one that ends with sin. I can type info and the full name of the module. Now here again, I'm using tab for autocomplete. I'm not a super fast typer. With Linux and Metasploit, if you use tab for autocompletion, you'll save yourself from making a lot of mistakes. And this is what I'm doing here. So once I finish this, I'll hit enter, and that brings up a full description of what the module is used for. So this gives me the name of the module, and it says this is a TCP port scanner, the module path, which is auxiliary/scanner, etc. And this is how we know, by the way, this is an auxiliary module, because it starts with auxiliary. There's a license and the rank. We'll talk about the rank later when we're talking about exploits. And if you look a little bit down here, you'll see the options that you can configure with this module. So before you run this module, there are some configuration options that you need to change. And to know what these configuration changes are, you can look at the options here. So let's say now that we've decided to use this module. This is exactly what we want. It does a port scan using the SYN technique that we talked about previously. And this is what we want to do. So how do we use this module? Again, it's as simple as typing use and the name of the module. Now notice here that the prompt has changed. We are no longer in the main MSF prompt. you can see that the prompt has turned into red scanner/port scan/sin, meaning that now I'm inside the sin port scan module. And now I can run commands that are different than the core commands. The first thing that I want to do is I want to change the options in this module. So I want to set things like what the target IP address is. This is what we did with nmap, right? If I want to scan an IP address, I need to provide the IP address. I also want to provide the port range. With nmap, by default, it doesn't scan the full port range. Similarly, with Metasploit, if we leave it to run by default, it will scan ports from 1 to 10,000. I want to change that. When we type options, we can see what settings we can change. One important thing here that I want you to keep in mind is under the required column, anything that says yes required means that the setting should have a value. So if you notice here, the first two settings, batch size and delay, are required and they have a value. They have to have a value. Compare that to the interface setting, it says no under required. So you don't have to set this. And this is why its current setting is empty. Yes, you can set it if you want to, so you can change from which interface do you want the scan to happen. So if you have more than one network interface, you can decide from which interface do you want to do the port scanning. However, this is not mandatory. But if you look at the R hosts, this is mandatory. It says required, yes. However, it's empty. So I have to fill up the setting. But what is R hosts? Well, if we look at the description, it tells us that these are the target host or hosts, or it could be a range, or it could be a host file. So in the R hosts, I can specify one of many things, either one IP, multiple IPs, a range of IPs, or a file with the IP addresses. Let's go with the easiest option and change the R hosts to one IP, which is the IP address of our target. How do I change the R hosts? How do I set it with a new value? I use the set option. So I'll type set R hosts and the IP address of my target. And you'll notice an output here that says R hosts is now this value, which is the IP address of my target. I also want to change the ports. Now notice here that the ports is required. However, by default, it has a value. So if I do not change it and I execute this module, it will run no problems. But I want to be a little bit more comprehensive and I want to cover the range of all the ports. And to do that, I can use set ports 1 to 65535. Now let me double check that these settings have actually changed. If I type options again, now you'll notice that the value of ports and the value of R hosts have changed to the values that we have set. Okay, brilliant. So now I'm ready to run the module. How do I run the module? Well, you might have guessed it, run. You just type run, hit enter, and the module will execute. This is a port scanner, so expect it to take some time. After a few seconds, it will start to find the open ports. You'll notice, however, that this is not as fancy as nmap. So you don't have information about the service running, the service version, and so on. And we've already done this with nmap, so I don't really need to keep this running. To kill this, I'm going to do Ctrl+C to interrupt the execution of this module. So this was one example of how to use an auxiliary module. Now let me go back to the main menu of Metasploit. To do that, I type back and notice that the prompt has changed again. I'm no longer inside the port scanning module, I'm back to the main menu.